Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
A blowout jobs report is blowing a hole in the market. Welcome to the Friday edition. As the May jobs report sends interest rates higher, pulls stocks lower, just a week ahead of the biggest IPO in history. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. President Trump, Kailey, wants lower interest rates, but the market is making a very different bet today.
Yeah, the market instead is thinking that the Fed could hike rates by the end of this year because with the jobs data showing that at least that part of their dual mandate seems to be holding up okay, gives them a lot more room to focus on the other side of the mandate, which is inflation. The thing is, President Trump today argues on Truce Social that growth doesn't necessarily mean inflation, as he suggests stocks should be going up, not down, on the back of 172,000 non-farm payrolls.
It's a huge number. The unemployment rate staying the same, but there are concerns here about what that means in terms of handcuffing the Fed or, in fact, prompting rate hikes, to your point, Kailey. And we're seeing real liquidation and some super high flyers of late that are pulling the indexes lower. It's not all being pulled out of the market, though. This rotation that we were seeing yesterday into some of the big banks, finance and healthcare, continues today. It's not looking good on the index level, however.
Yeah, and not looking good for the AI trade. And of course, the AI trade and stocks associated with it happens to represent the bulk of the weight in these markets, especially say, the Nasdaq 100, which is why you are seeing that drastic underperformance today. So let's get a check on the numbers now as they stand. We're down more than 3% on the Nasdaq 100, and Charlie Pellet has a look at that and the other figures for us up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey and Joe, and I'm going to lead things off with the Nasdaq 100. Right now, that index is down 3.2%. We've got Nasdaq down 2.9%. All of this, to keeping it in context, we've got the S&P 500 index down 130 points, down 1.7%. The Dow at a record yesterday, today tumbling 385 points, down by 0.7%. Wall Street's historic weekly run set to come to a halt. Stocks and bonds are falling after that solid jobs report this morning. Our coverage will continue. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down 2.6%. The VIX on the rise, above 18. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, hard hit today, plunging now by 7.5%. Some of the names in that index: NVIDIA down 4.9%, Micron down 9%, Broadcom down 5.8%. The 10-year now at 4.52%, the 2-year 4.14%, the 30-year 4.99%. Gold at $43.41 the ounce, down almost 3%. West Texas Intermediate crude holding above 90 at $90.16 a barrel, down 3.1%. Brent 93.08, down by 2%. Bitcoin, we did trade briefly below $60,000. Bitcoin now back to $61,250, but Bitcoin today down by 3.6%. I mentioned the move lower in crude oil. Oil majors down as well. ExxonMobil down 1.2%. Chevron right now down 0.6%. ConocoPhillips trading lower by 1.4%. So again, recapping, stocks lower. S&P down 136, down 1.8%. The 10-year currently yielding 4.52%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. As Charlie was just running through, this market appears to be reading good economic news as bad news, while President Trump would prefer that the good news be read as perhaps great news, because he said on Truce Social that this jobs report today was a great jobs report. And as I mentioned earlier, he said growth does not mean inflation. He poses a question: how else can a country attain greatness? And of course, it's a pitch around economic greatness that the president is likely to be making in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin later today, where he's scheduled to hold an event this afternoon. He's en route there right now, Joe.
He sure is, on his way to the airport, and we're going to be keeping tabs on that address. Hard to tell exactly what the message will be, Kailey. The president resorted to the affordability as a hoax line in the Oval Office the other day, and that's not likely what the headline is going to be here. But the fact is, we are looking at a more expensive world with interest rates rising. 10 years above 4.5%. That's going to come through on mortgage rates, and you're paying $4.22 a gallon for gasoline today. In Wisconsin, where the president is heading, it's $4 and a penny. So let's start with the message the president plans to deliver today with Kate Sullivan, our White House correspondent, who joins us now from the North Lawn of the White House, knowing the president has just left the building. Kate, what do we expect to hear from the president today, and why Wisconsin?
Yeah, that's right. So the president is headed to Wisconsin right now. His motorcade just left a few moments ago from the White House. It's going to be his first time back in the swing state since the 2024 campaign, and this event in particular is focused on Wisconsin farmers. He'll be speaking this afternoon at a corn and soybean farm in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and it's coming at a time when farmers have been hit particularly hard by the president's tariffs and by the rising fuel costs and fertilizer costs because of the war in Iran. The president's approval ratings have been really slipping because of all of the economic anxiety surrounding the war in Iran. So Trump today is really looking to shore up this key constituency. Midwestern farmers were very critical to his success in winning back the White House. He's really trying to tamp down those economic fears and speak to them directly and try to do what we've seen this White House do attempt to do several times, which is really pivot back to domestic issues amid this war in Iran.
Well, we're seeing now, and if you're with us on Bloomberg TV, you can see as well the presidential motorcade rolling up at Joint Base Andrews to Air Force One, where, of course, the president will board and then fly to Wisconsin. Gives me a sense that maybe this event might be running a little bit later than it was originally scheduled. So. He's a little bit behind on his daily schedule here. Kate, he also apparently had the time to speak to the Wall Street Journal, and in an interview talked about his tapping of Bill Pulte, the FHFA director, as acting director of national intelligence. He said yesterday in the Oval Office, this is just an acting position. It's not a permanent one. And yet he's telling the Wall Street Journal that there are things he wants Bill Pulte to do in that acting capacity, including firing people in the intelligence community. What can you tell us?
That's right. I thought it was really interesting in this interview with the Wall Street Journal. The president said that Pulte, because he's in this acting role, so it's just temporary, he will be naming somebody else in the role. And in this acting position, Pulte does not require Senate confirmation. But I thought it was interesting. He said that Pulte would be less shackled because of this position, because it's just an acting role. He said that Pulte could make a lot of changes. We're expecting from this interview, it seems like a lot of shakeups in the intelligence community, could make a lot of changes before whoever his ultimate pick is to lead the intelligence agency comes in. But the president said that he wants to make the intel community smaller. It looks like there are going to be widespread changes, which will have, of course, large repercussions, especially amid the war in Iran. And Pulte has been a controversial pick from the beginning here. Even Republicans on the Hill have been talking about his lack of national security experience. So it seems that there are lots of changes coming for the intel community here.
All right, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan reporting live at the White House. Thank you so much. And President Trump has just climbed the stairs of Air Force One, and he is now boarding the plane again en route to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. Kate, thank you. And as Kate was just alluding to, we have seen something of bipartisan pushback in the United States Senate as to the tapping of Bill Pulte in this acting position. So much so that on the Senate floor in the early hours this morning, we saw a procedural vote to advance an extension of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act go down. It failed. The concern, of course, among Democrats and even some Republicans is extending these government spy powers, warrantless surveillance, if Bill Pulte could potentially abuse them. At least that is what they are saying. So let's get into this now with our political panel today. Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg politics contributor, Democratic analyst, and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center is with us, alongside Marc Short, chair of Advancing American Freedom and former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence, also former director of legislative affairs in the first Trump White House. So Marc, on that note, I will come to you first. As the White House made, and President Trump specifically, a big miscalculation if it wants FISA extended in saying not just Bill Pulte serve in this acting role, but telling the Wall Street Journal that he wants Bill Pulte to reduce the size of our intelligence community?
A couple things there, Kailey. I think that the administration has had mixed messaging on FISA from the start. There's been times when the president, even the first administration, claimed that FISA was used to spy on him. And even though I think there were abuses in as far as the oversight of what was happening in President Trump's campaign, that wasn't FISA. And so it's been mixed messaging. I don't know how enthusiastic they really are, so I don't think it's a priority. I think the Pulte thing, in many cases, I think the president often throws out names to see what the reaction will be. And in some cases, candidly just makes a mockery of the Senate confirmation process. But then he takes the feedback and then pivots. And so the feedback is Pulte clearly is not going to get confirmed. So now I'm going to say, hey, Pulte, how about you go clean it out so then I can come forward with a more credible candidate afterward and have a smaller agency for that person to manage. And I think there's probably, honestly, wisdom, I think, in shrinking some of the size of these agencies. But again, there's probably a better way to approach that is to make the case as to why I feel like the intelligence community is bloated and what we need to do to make those reforms.
This all took place in what was a very long night working through reconciliation. But when it came to that FISA vote around midnight, Secretary of State Marco Rubio shows up in the cloakroom. What does that tell you about the way the White House was managing it in the heat of the moment?
I think there's probably some in the administration who are more invested in continuing FISA, and I would imagine Secretary Rubio is one of those who thinks this is important. And I think I agree with that. I think it's incredibly essential that we continue FISA, and it should get reauthorized, and hopefully that transpires. I think at this point there's kind of posturing to say, hey, we're not going to get Pulte confirmed, but I think the administration probably knows that anyhow. So when the Pulte thing gets cleared up, I think you'll then see FISA move forward.
Okay, so does the Pulte thing, in your mind, Jeanne, have to be cleared up before the Senate will advance FISA? The deadline is June 12th. They're not working with that much time here.
No, they're not. And it does have to be cleaned up. And I think, one thing that has been left unaddressed in this conversation is what the outgoing DNI was doing to curry favor with Donald Trump prior to leaving, which was going down to Georgia to address the 2020 campaign and election, which Donald Trump still believes was stolen, and really unprecedented for the DNI to be down there, and then to allow a conversation between the FBI agents on the scene and the President of the United States, as was reported. And so now we have her pushed out and leaving, and we have the replacement, somebody with absolutely no intelligence background whatsoever, but even more intent on currying favor with Donald Trump. And that has a lot of people concerned. I believe it's not just going to be about cleaning out the intelligence agency, which is enough. He's in there for 210 days. That gets us to late December, when he will be overseeing the nation's intelligence agencies through the midterm election. And there's nothing Donald Trump wants more than the GOP to win the election, or he will cry foul and interference. And that is the real concern here. That is what Donald Trump wants him to do as DNI. He has no intent on putting him up for a confirmation in the Senate. He doesn't even care about that. It is going to be about getting retribution, as Pulte has already been doing, and having a better place to do it from against his enemies, and also about crying foul if the Republicans don't do well in the midterm election.
Well, after an 18-hour marathon vote-a-rama, Jeanne, the reconciliation plan passed. This is more than $70 billion for ICE, Customs, Border Protection. 5247 was the final count. This is the same debate that led to the longest government shutdown and the longest partial shutdown in history. What did Democrats have to show for it, knowing that there was no demasking and there was no action on warrants when we're talking about immigration enforcement?
Yeah, and to add to that, they don't have a lot to show for it. But of course, Republicans just put another $70+ billion in the hands of ICE and CBP. I'm sitting here in New York. Look at what is going on in the detention center in Newark, where people are on a hunger strike. And the charge is that this is being run like some kind of concentration camp. And if the administration wants to push back on that, you'd think they would allow transparency and allow the governor of New Jersey, the senators who are funding this thing, the Congress people funding this, to get into these detention centers and to see what is actually going on there. And yet they're doing everything they can to fight it. So I think Democrats were right to hold the line on this. They lost on the slush fund. Republicans want to go forward with it. And yesterday, Donald Trump said, what? I love the slush fund. I think it's important. So you can bet that'll come back as well. And that's all at the hands of Republicans who have allowed all of this to go through.
The slush fund, of course, Jeanne's referring to is the almost $8 billion for the so-called anti-weaponization fund. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche says it's dead. It seems that Republican senators decided to take him at his word. But President Trump wants acting AG Todd Blanche to become just Attorney General. Todd Blanche. Do you expect this issue to rear its head again in the confirmation process? Can he even be confirmed in the Senate?
I'm not sure that he can. I do expect it to come back up, and I think that he'd probably continue to be in an acting role for 18 months. And so I think that's something that you'll see the administration not really care as much about the confirmation process moving forward. I do think, we recite this number as nearly 1.8, and it's important to note it's actually 1.776. That's right. As if there's an homage to our nation's founders that somehow compares the people who are rioting and assaulting police, the people who risked their lives and fortunes to found our country. And so it's I think important to keep that number in mind. I do think on the reconciliation package as well, this was a fumble on our side, because I think one of the things that led to Donald Trump's remarkable comeback was how poorly the Democrats managed the border. And their continued reluctance to fund CBP and ICE should be a political advantage for us. It should be a stark contrast. But by putting the ballroom funding and the slush fund in the bill, that's been all the messaging for the last several weeks. We've lost the plot on this is actually a border security bill. And so the messaging has been miserable, and it should have been a big advantage for Republicans versus Democrats.
So you're ready to do it again? Reconciliation 3.0 is now what we were hearing about that from the chair of the Appropriations Committee before this ever took place. I love this line from Senator John Kennedy, who's entertaining every time he speaks. Republican from Louisiana. When people boldly declare we're going to do a third reconciliation package, I generally tell them, I hope you're right. But in the meantime, back off the crank. What do you think, Marc Short?
There's not going to be a third reconciliation package.
No chance.
No. I understand that. I do think it's a good messaging vehicle to say, here's if you were to reelect us, here are the policy priorities. So there's an important reason to move forward with it for messaging to the American people as you had in the midterms. But I think that reconciliation is hard as it is. The margins in the House continue to get more narrow. You're headed to a midterm election, which the president's popularity numbers should be in the 30s. You're going to have Republican members looking to distance themselves. And particularly now that the White House has alienated so many senators by their primary efforts, there's no way that you're going to be able to put together a coalition of people that right now is going to be able to support a third reconciliation package. So, again, I think it's good for messaging, but let's not think it's actually going to pass Congress.
Well, and as you allude to, these reconciliation packages are difficult, even though they only take a simple majority. This is supposed to be a partisan process. It eliminates the need for a lot of bipartisanship. But we are seeing this pattern where even Republicans seem to not always vote in line with each other or with the president. We saw more evidence of that in the House this week, not, Jeanne, just with the war powers resolution that passed, but with yesterday as well, the passing of an advancing of Ukraine aid and sanctions on Russia. It obviously got to the floor via a discharge petition, but you had a number of Republicans, 18 of them, vote with Democrats on this. What does it tell you?
Yeah, that's right. It says that as time has gone on, Republicans are feeling like they can occasionally take a step out from what the president and the administration want them to do. And I think it's not a huge surprise on Ukraine funding. There's been a lot of Republicans who have long supported that. But I do think we are seeing more of that. That's partly why the president didn't get his ballroom and he didn't get his slush fund, was because obviously Republicans who have control said they were going to put their foot down on those kinds of things. And, on this reconciliation 3.0, I agree with Marc. I don't think this thing is going to make any headway. But can you imagine what Donald Trump would throw into the mix if it was going forward? I mean, as of now, we've got ballrooms and slush funds. Yesterday, he's talking about promenades. I mean, I just can't imagine what he would throw into the 3.0, so there we go.
I don't know. He's still got private funds for the ballroom, right? They're not stopping building that thing.
Yeah.
We'll find out together. Marc Short, Jeanne, Zaino, thank you both for weighing in. Great insights and a fascinating conversation every day here on Balance of Power. Alongside Kailey, Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. Stay with us with much more ahead on the Friday edition on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq very much in the red. Hotter than expected jobs numbers have Wall Street selling off right to the numbers here because we got this historic weekly run coming to a halt. S&P down 140 right now. at 74.44. You recall earlier this week we were trading and closing above 7,600. Right now the S&P is down 1.8%. We've got the Dow retreating from yesterday's record, down 440 now, a drop there of just about 0.9%. To be sure, S&P very close to session lows. Nasdaq down 823 points. Had to pause to make sure that 800 number was correct. 822 points lower on Nasdaq. That is a decline right now of 3%. Nasdaq 100 index down 1,052 on the Nasdaq 100 index. That is a drop there of 3.4%. Fast-moving markets. Got to keep it locked into Bloomberg television and radio for the very latest. The SOX, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Stock Exchange Index, it is plunging by 7.8%. All of this with a VIX below 19 now. A 10-year at 4.53%, the 2-year 4.15%, and a 30-year 4.99%. Gold at $43.40 the ounce. Spot gold down 0.3%, down 3%. West Texas Intermediate crude 90 even a barrel, down 3.3%. Brent crude 92.87 a barrel, down by 2.3%. Bitcoin 60,864 was trading briefly below 60,000. Tech names hit hard. Among some of those names, Nvidia down 5%, Micron down 9.4%. Shares of Broadcom, they are down 5.2%. Advanced Micro Devices down by 9%. So again, recapping the equity numbers, big numbers to the downside. Nasdaq down 780 points now, down 2.9%. Nasdaq 100 index down 1,015 points. That is a decline right now of 3.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Well, Charlie just said it all. This is not a good day, and it does feel like we're going from rotation to outright sell-off, depending on where you're looking. There are still some green shoots in this market, but we are seeing new lows for the session. So we quickly want to bring in Nora Melinda for a little more color on this market. Bloomberg Markets correspondent. Nora, we've got a stronger than expected jobs report, got interest rates moving higher. Is there more to it than that as the markets anticipate higher rates? We're also coming off some challenging earnings, or at least the way they were interpreted. They were actually pretty impressive reports from the likes of Palo, CrowdStrike, Broadcom, but the reactions were severe.
Well, expectations are high in the market as you think about all these tech names. So much money being spent in this sector more broadly. But the question is whether or not all the money that's being spent in the sector, when we think about artificial intelligence, whether or not that's actually going to pay off. So today, as you really factor in that strong surprise jobs report that we got today, and you also think about the earnings that we got out of Broadcom and some of the peers, you're really seeing a crackdown right now on the tech sector. If you dig into the S&P 500, information technology, that sector alone, the worst performing group in the S&P 500, no surprise there, down more than 4%. So what I'm hearing from my sources is, yes, we are seeing an acceleration of this sell-off, but it's really focused on the tech space. It's a rotation that we're seeing playing out right now because, as you mentioned just a bit earlier, we do still have some green shoots in this market, taking a look at consumer staples, healthcare. So you're seeing investors on Wall Street really rotating out of these high growth names that we're seeing in the tech space and really shifting towards some of those more defensive sectors. That's where you're really seeing some positive gains here in the market.
Okay, so if we're seeing a market that is rotating out of tech and high growth areas, what's the appetite going to be for a more than $1 trillion, almost $2 trillion valued company in SpaceX when it debuts next week?
And that's the question. We're just a week away from that. And there is a question as to whether or not what the appetite would look like, especially because SpaceX is not the only IPO that we have upcoming or expected from some of these names in the tech space. What I find to be particularly interesting when we think about the SpaceX IPO is the fact that Musk has reserved about 30% of SpaceX float for retail clients. Now, that's different when we think about the fact that it's usually Wall Street that gets a jump on IPOs like this. But the idea that we're seeing retail really having this space being reserved for them, it's really showing you about how the retail Main Street is really involved in some of these massive names that we're thinking about, specifically SpaceX, as we're thinking about this IPO coming next Friday.
All right, Bloomberg Markets correspondent Nora Melinda, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we're all looking forward to the debut of trading next Friday. But that's next Friday. this Friday is a jobs Friday. And obviously, while the market isn't necessarily taking the numbers well, the White House is trying to put a positive spin on it. This was the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett on Bloomberg earlier.
We're getting positive jobs numbers because we've got high wage growth and native-born Americans are rushing into the labor market in droves. And so that negative story is gone. The Trump economy is surprising Wall Street analysts over and over again, and they need to maybe think about getting the supply side of their model fixed. If the Fed, pays close attention to the data and thinks about why it keeps surprising on the upside, them especially, and surprising on the downside on inflation. I mean, absent the Gulf issue, the inflation basically would be completely under control right now.
For more, we turn to Christopher Smart, founder and managing partner of Arbroath Group and former special assistant to the president at the National Economic Council during the Obama administration. Christopher, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We heard Kevin Hassett there allude to high wage growth, and I'm not sure if you view the wage growth numbers today of 3.4% as being that high on a relative basis, at least relative to recent years, and especially considering where inflation is. Do you take confidence in this labor market from the strong headline number in terms of thinking of the overall economy, knowing that with the inflationary pressures still out there, there may be some headwinds on the ability to actually consume, even if you are employed?
Well, Kailey, Joe, good to be with you. I think it is one of those moments where markets and analysts were clearly surprised by this number. I think, as Kevin Hassett pointed out, of all of the distribution of forecasts, this beat even the most optimistic forecasts. I'll pause and just say it's a little troubling to hear the administration keep focusing on native-born Americans and jobs for them rather than legal immigrants to this country, but I'll set that aside. I think they're enjoying a tailwind from corporate earnings that have been high, investment that has been good. I think you can sort of try and look through and separate out investment that is going into the AI boom versus things that may or may not be related to the president's tariffs and other immigration policies. But I think what is really remarkable is that all of this is happening in the midst of a continuing crisis in the Middle East, a Strait of Hormuz that looks like it's not opening anytime soon, and oil prices that seem to be high, but mostly taking this all in stride.
So I'm just curious how you're looking under the hood at this market. Christopher, it's great to see you. When we consider wages, for instance, you had 172,000 jobs, and it's probably going to mean something when we get right down to it here. The average hourly earnings in this report rose 3.4% from a year earlier. How much pressure could we see on wages rising to keep up with these trends?
I think that's what everybody's going to be looking for very closely. I mean, on the other side of it, you've got wages that are increasing costs to companies. On the other side of it, you have a consumer where sentiment has never been lower to rock bottom than it is currently, but that continues to spend, continues to keep those retail numbers fairly steady. Household balance sheets, depending on income levels, but overall are fairly solid. So I think this is a moment of, relatively good news. Now the market is taking the good news as an opportunity to correct. It's certainly putting bond market projections into, a second or third look with these numbers. But I'll just add and say it probably makes Kevin Warsh's first Fed meeting in first few months a lot easier because the pressure is off him right now to make any cuts.
Well, but is the pressure going to potentially be on him to hike rates, or is the data not strong enough for that?
It's hard to know what the president's going to say, right? But the president seems like he's backed off of that, at least since he was sworn in. Most important, though, I think markets have looked through this and they want to know, is Kevin Warsh, regardless of what he has said in the past, to get this job, to get through his confirmation hearings, it would be implausible and utterly unrealistic to expect him to be able to bring about a Fed rate cut anytime soon, particularly given these numbers. And I think that takes a little pressure off of him to be able to turn around at the White House and say, look, I'm following the data. This is what we're doing. And it reassures markets that they're following the data.
I guess he'd have the markets on his side, but when you read Truth Social this morning, I don't know how comfortable Kevin Warsh should be. With a great jobs report, the president writes, like just announced, stocks should go up, not down. That's the way it was for 200 years. Growth does not mean inflation. How would you respond to the president?
Well, I've been a portfolio manager for a long time, and when you start saying, oh gosh, the markets are just wrong, you really need to look in the mirror again and ask yourself if you've really understood what's going on right now. You know, the president has his own particular lens through all of this, of course, but I think if you are an investor today, you clearly see a price shock coming from the Middle East that may or may not last, but it's a shock that comes on top of inflationary pressures that we were still trying to wring out of the system. I don't think this is a moment for the Fed to hike right now in response to what's going on in the Middle East. It's really a moment to stand pat, to see how those dynamics play out, to see how the global balance of supply and demand really levels out in the next several months, even with the straits not opening again, or not opening much, because even if there's a deal, it's going to take a long time for them to reopen fully. And so if you're the Fed, this is a great time to be able to say, look, there's a lot going on right now. We're going to do nothing and get paid to do nothing.
Well, on the Strait of Hormuz, Christopher, you have a new op-ed in the New York Times, which is entitled, "The Strait of Hormuz is getting less dire by the day." You write that with every passing day, the world is learning to live without the Gulf's seaborne exports. You argue, obviously, that this hasn't been painless, but I guess my question to you is, have we been able to live with it thus far because there were inventories to draw from? Those are being depleted now. Could we not still reach a breaking point when there's no more inventory left?
Well, there will be breaking points in certain companies, in certain countries, and maybe even in certain regions of the world, or with certain parts of the hydrocarbon supply chain. You know, LNG is a much more difficult commodity to reorient different parts of the world. But you're seeing a variety of things, as markets always do, responding to those high oil prices. But you're seeing oil coming out through pipelines from the Gulf. You're seeing a little bit of shipping come through, tiny amount. You're also seeing a big response on the part of other producers in the U.S., in Mexico, in Kazakhstan, and other Brazil. And you're seeing some demand destruction in the sense that there are some rationing measures underway in Asia. So all of those things put together help you. You know, we're not headed for some big cataclysmic crash right now. There will be, as I say, a lot more pain ahead, but a lot of what you're seeing right now is the world adjusting to what is unlikely to be a Gulf a Gulf supply anytime in the future. There's no way the world is going to rely on the Gulf anytime soon for 20% of its oil supply. So we're going to be looking elsewhere.
Christopher may well be reflecting the market attitude on this and why we're not still in triple-digit territory. $90 a barrel today in New York. Christopher Smart, Arbroath Group. It's always great to spend some time with you, Christopher. Thank you. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington alongside Kailey Leinz. This is Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We begin with a developing story headline right now off the Bloomberg Professional Service. A group of states is preparing a lawsuit to block Paramount Skydance's acquisition of Warner Brothers. Now, that is according to Reuters, which cites two sources. Shares are moving on that report. Warner Brothers Discovery down now by 2.3%. We got Paramount Skydance on a down day for the rest of the market. Right now, PSKY, it is tumbling by 7%. Wall Street's historic weekly run screeching to a halt. Stocks hitting by a tech sell-off and higher bond yields after this morning's solid jobs report added to bets that the Fed's next rate move will be a hike. S&P right now down 119. We are off the bottom, but still at 74.64. This in a week in which the S&P did close above 7,600 for the first time. Today, the S&P is down 1.6%. The Dow, after yesterday's record, down 360, down 0.7. Nasdaq Composite Index down 740 for Nasdaq, a drop right now of 2.8%. The Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares down 2.6%. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's Semiconductor Stock Index, down now by 7.3%. And the VIX on the rise, now just below 18. 10-year at 4.53%. The 2-year on this jobs Friday, 4.16%. The 30-year year, 4.99%. Gold selling off down $130 the ounce, down 2.9%. Right now we've got spot gold, $43.42 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude just above $90 a barrel, down 2.9%. Barrel of Brent, $93.12 the barrel, down 2%, and Bitcoin 60,800 on Bitcoin. It is down 4.2%, but it did break below the key $60,000 level. Again, recapping, S&P 500 index down 126, drop there of 1.7%. Briefly, one sports note: the Chicago Bears planning to leave Illinois and head to Indiana. After over 100 years, team intends to build a new stadium in Hammond, Indiana, with the exact site yet to be selected. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I wonder if there might be a little negotiating going on there. Charlie, thank you very much.
We've
Charlie
been through that in D.C.
Yeah, that's true. Boy, Charlie's had a day, huh? This market's having a day. He'll be back at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, with the latest read on stocks and bonds. Of course, a week from today, we're going to be talking about the biggest IPO ever. That's SpaceX. The appetite for all things space has been remarkable. We stopped down for all the launches around here. Getting a rocket off the ground, though, Kailey, is not always as easy as someone like Elon Musk might make it seem. As a matter of fact, there's this company, Launch on Demand, that's preparing to break ground later this year. With the massive race underway in Latin America, specifically when it comes to space infrastructure, where do you launch these things?
Yeah, especially as we're seeing a widening in the commerciality of space, frankly. You want satellites up there. If SpaceX is to believe this is going to play a role in AI compute going forward, you need to have the places for all of that activity to originate, to get up to space. And this is something that they looked at in Wall Street Week this week, as Bloomberg's David Weston explored this, and how it's not just a race for companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin to vie for space, but it's actually maybe a little bit bigger than that when we think about a geopolitical space race and the competition between the U.S. and China. Listen.
As Launch on Demand prepares to break ground later this year, a larger race is already underway in Latin America. Space infrastructure has become a new front in the U.S.-China rivalry.
China is aggressively making investments in our hemisphere, particularly in Latin and South America. Also, partnerships that they have made with Caribbean nations to have aerospace applications, satellite demonstrations, civilian applications, also with military application components to it.
A recent report from the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party warned about China's growing space footprint in the region, including more than 10 satellite tracking stations. Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan is a member of the committee.
This is a call to double down on the way our system works. And so we don't want to be ceding ground to China. We don't want to see them continuing to eat our lunch with our neighbors. And we can win this race.
I guess you could look at it as a marathon or maybe an ultra marathon, but I don't see an end here. There is not a clear finish line.
Carrie Bingen is a director of CSIS's Aerospace Security Project.
Well, I thought what was really interesting in the decades that we were competing against the Soviet Union, so much of what was happening in space, it was fueled by government. I think what you're seeing now, which really sets this current era apart, is so much of what's happening in space is commercial. Over 80% of the satellites on orbit today are commercial systems. A lot from the United States, SpaceX, Starlink, but many other countries are now players in space. China has ambitions to be the world's space power. Their presence and their capabilities in Latin America are part of that strategy. They want access, they want influence. They want to be able to band together with these countries in bodies like the United Nations to start shaping where the standards are.
We started this program well before people realized that China was, very interested in taking over real estate in Latin America. As we have gotten the Trump administration and President Abinader's administration together, they are aligned on what has been called, the pivot to the Western Hemisphere. So I would call the spaceport more of an artifact of the decision to pivot to the Western Hemisphere rather than, anything else. And we emphasize this is run by a U.S. company.
that is designed to be commercial, that is complementary, not competitive, with the spaceports in the United States. And we work very, very hard to make sure that they understand we're a friend, not a foe.
Really interesting piece coming up on Wall Street Week, which airs right here on Bloomberg TV and radio after the late edition of Balance of Power. It starts 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Kailey, I have long said, and you've heard it repeatedly on this program, when Americans, if Americans, and it does seem to be a when, not an if, see a Chinese flag on the moon, the urgency under this story will suddenly materialize.
Yeah, of course, the U.S. is trying to make sure our flag is back on the moon.
That's right.
First. We're, 2 years ahead? NASA says 2028 is our goal.
Idea.
China's looking at 2030.
Got a few more stages on the Artemis before we get there, but that is something that we're watching, along with David Weston's great program that will be coming up at 6 p.m. Eastern. Kailey, we haven't really had a chance to mention, with so much news here and our focus on the markets today, what's happening in and with Iran outside of the market implications of rising energy prices that so many have touched on already. Iran most recently saying that no progress has been made in talks, and we have big questions about what's happening in Lebanon, where, of course, the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah remains a huge sticking point in our negotiations. It's something the president talked about in the Oval Office just yesterday. Listen.
I think Hezbollah, I will tell you, they called us and they said, how about stopping? And I think you're going to see things happen over there. It would be really nice if Lebanon could have some peace. I spoke to Bibi Netanyahu about that. We're going to win one way or the other. It's going to be militarily or on paper.
Earlier in the week, the president confirming in an interview some of the spicy language he used on the phone with Benjamin Netanyahu as that conflict continued to rage. Little has changed, though, this week when it comes to talks between the U.S. and Iran, and that's where we start our conversation with Melissa Toufanian, the former senior advisor to the Secretary of State in the Biden administration, managing director at Navigator Research. Melissa, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining our conversation today on Bloomberg. We're going into another weekend here. There are questions about whether we should even be calling this a war. If it is a ceasefire, however, that's a curious word to use as we continue shooting at each other. What needs to develop in the next couple of days to see this not turn back into a real kinetic action, a real war between our two countries?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And as far as what we need to see, it's serious diplomatic negotiations. It's the President Trump taking this seriously and the Iranians taking this seriously. As you said, we haven't seen progress. A lot of that hinges on the negotiations of what's going on with Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel, because Iran has told us they're not willing to negotiate until there is a solution there. But really what I think is important, and I hope for President Trump to keep in mind, is when we think about President Trump's foreign policy. Last year, at around this time last year, his foreign policy, his approval rating was about 6 points underwater by Americans. And now when we look at how Americans feel about Trump's foreign policy, he's now underwater by 21 points. That's a 15-point drop over the last year alone. And it's really not surprising. Nearly every American is experiencing those increased oil and gas prices, whether it's when they're paying $6 per gallon at the pump or increased grocery prices due to those increased transportation costs. So Americans really want to see this war come to an end. I think they're desperate for a solution that will help alleviate their everyday costs. And so I think they're eager to see progress on these talks.
Well, so when we consider a solution that would specifically alleviate costs, Melissa, it's one thing if we are able to get to a negotiation to have the Strait of Hormuz declared open. It's another for the Strait of Hormuz to actually return in terms of the amount of transit that goes through it in energy supplies to what it was before this conflict. Do you really think we're going to get back there, especially as Iran and even Oman, or Iran contends at least that Oman is involved with this notion that they want to have control over it and potentially charge tolls?
I'm not optimistic. And I think you lay this out really well in the sense that what we are now negotiating over, what President Trump, on behalf of the United States, is now negotiating over, is to get back to where we were before this war started. We are now negotiating to try to reopen the Strait of Hormuz that was completely open. And what Iran has now gained in leverage is an understanding that it can block the Strait of Hormuz, that it has the control, whether, as you said, to impose tolls going forward, but also has the ability to keep a chokehold on the global economy by by closing the Strait of Hormuz, it has sent not only prices in the U.S., but prices for people around the world spiraling. And that causes tensions in so many different areas. It raises costs on so many different things. Obviously, fuel prices drive so much of the cost needed for everyday items when it comes to the transportation costs that have to be baked in there. So I think Iran has gained knowledge of leverage that it can use going forward.
To what extent will the conflict, where we began, between Israel and Hezbollah determine the way forward for the U.S. and Iran?
It seems that it needs to, and that Iran has said, the Iranian negotiators, its foreign ministers, have said that they need to see a solution in Lebanon before there can be serious progress between the United States and Iran. I know President Trump and his team seem very eager to have talks on Iran's nuclear program, but in order for that to happen, there needs to be progress between Hezbollah and Israel. So I think that's why, as you mentioned in the beginning, the stern language that President Trump told us that he used with Bibi Netanyahu is because in order to get to the negotiating table on the issues that he wants to do on reopening the Strait of Hormuz, whatever the future there may hold, on the future of Iran's nuclear talks, the path to get there is through Lebanon, really.
Well, of course, President Trump was very proud of the deal to end the fighting in Gaza, though obviously a longer-term agreement has been hard to come by. He clearly wants there to be a ceasefire in Lebanon as well between Israel and Hezbollah. He also, when he came to office, very much so wanted to see an end to another conflict, and that's the war between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy yesterday had an open letter to Putin calling for negotiations. Vladimir Putin has rejected that call, saying he sees today no sense in a meeting. Are we getting any closer to a conclusion to that war that we're all paying a lot less attention to these days?
It doesn't seem like it. As we've seen, President Zelenskyy, as you said, has asked for that face-to-face meeting, and Putin has declined it. And so I think Putin feels as though he has the leverage to do that. But of course, Zelenskyy wants to find the way forward for his country to exist, for his people to know peace. And in order to do that, I think there does need to be those direct talks between Zelenskyy and Putin. But what we did see recently, just last night here in the United States, seeing that that Congress in our House passed a bipartisan bill in support of Ukraine, of sending more much-needed aid. So I think that is a good sign, in that even as people aren't paying attention to the conflict as much as they used to, as you stated, that the support still exists.
All right, Melissa Toufanian, thank you so much for joining us, Managing Director at Navigator Research. We appreciate it. Now, as we were discussing the war with Iran with Melissa, President Trump is actually gaggling on Air Force One right now and reiterated in remarks to reporters that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. But he's also, interestingly, talking about AI. As we have seen this idea floated in a legislative effort by Senator Bernie Sanders, and even with Sam Altman, we understand, on the Hill this week, of public ownership in AI companies. President Trump says the concept of American public AI partnership is interesting. He says he has spoken to all AI companies, and they'll be coming to the White House, the big ones, maybe next week, to talk about how people can benefit from AI.
As opposed to a 50% tax.
Those
may not end up being the same, but I can't wait to hear what that is.
Yeah.
AI stocks are not faring terribly well in the markets today. Charlie Pellet will have a look in just a couple of minutes. We'll meet you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern on the late edition of Balance of Power, maybe more on what the president said in the gaggle. It's all ahead here on Bloomberg.